Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. Our great coach on this episode is Noel Donaldson. Noel is a rowing coach. He was a coxswain and competed at the 1979 World Championships and then transitioned into coaching in 1980. In 1990, he began coaching Australia's Oarsome Foursome, who won Olympic golds in 1992 and 1996, as well as 5 World Championships. In 2013, he became the coach of the New Zealand team of Hamish and Eric Murray, and also managed to coach them to back-to-back Olympic gold medals. The fact that he has coached 2 separate crews to back-to-back gold medals puts him in very rarefied air. In fact, he is a serial winning coach whose wisdom transcends sport. And some of the key highlights from our interview were the importance of treating each new campaign as something separate from the last one, and setting goals that are appropriate for that team in that moment, not simply reflecting on the past to set future expectations. How the Oarsome Foursome would go about debriefing after a performance, and importantly, how they had the ability to switch on and off, which is something that Noel thinks is lacking a little with today's athletes. And he's learning as he has matured as a coach that winning at all costs can cause mental health challenges that end up meaning that winning is only temporary. It's a great interview, and I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. And just before we go to the interview, if you like what we do here on the podcast, then head over to our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com. There you will find loads of exclusive audio and video content that you can download and share with your teams, friends and family to bring a different context to the challenges that they might be facing. And now, please enjoy our interview with Noel Donaldson.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Noel Donaldson, good morning and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Good morning to you, Paul.
Happy to have you here, Noel. And something easy to get us going. Could you tell us where you are in the world, perhaps what time it is, and what you've done so far today?
Well, I'm not long out of bed. It's Thursday morning, the 4th of May, I think it is here, which is normally a slower morning, a bit of regeneration for athletes. So they start at 9 a.m. It's just after 7 a.m. here. I'm in the Melbourne University Boat Club, what they call it Cafe Academus. So it's just a bit of a pun there for a little meeting room where the athletes can come and do some study. Being a university boat club, there's very, very rarely anyone in here, mind you. So that might be some indicator of they might prefer to be on the water than hitting their books. So it's fairly private here. And I've got a couple of hours till the troops come down and start their day's training.
Well, thank you for spending those couple of hours with us talking about rowing, the Olympics, gold medals, and I guess all things leadership. And I want to start, Noel, by just asking you about some of the great coaches you've either worked with or seen close up. Dick Tonks, Alan Cotter, Brian Richardson, and of course there's Marty Aitken too. And I'm just wondering from this perspective, what do you think the great coaches do differently that sets them apart?
I think the first thing is sort of from a personality point of view, we're all different. I think if someone said, describe Dick Tonks, you'd say, well, give me 10 minutes, and I'll tell you about someone who doesn't fit in the box of the people who you meet, most of the days, and I think that's pretty true for most of them. And it's easy to criticise ourselves, to say that, this is some funny mannerisms that you might notice by a particular person like that. But I think in one sense you actually have to have it. I'm sure people, if they ask the same question about me, they'd say that I'm just short, loudmouth, ex-coxswain who thinks he knows it all. People would wax lyrical about what your personality is. But I think if you're not strong in yourself, and that doesn't mean you have to be verbose like I am, but if you sit a bit quietly in the background, I think that's less influence you might have on certainly the top end people, who are looking for the as you used the word leadership before, who are looking for your leadership, and I think you control a little bit better. And I don't mean that word in a controlling sense, but if you're a little bit different, as distinct from just the run of the mill, like off the street type sort of thing there too, then we're not trying to level the playing field, but I think the respect sort of thing comes out of a little bit of the quirkiness that we might all have. So I think that's one aspect of it. And of course, the people who you mentioned, Dick's a master coach, but like all of us, our reputation comes because of our good athletes, and there's no question. Dick's greatest ability was his ability to align and understand that the best athletes needed the best coach. And so that was him, in his own situations. So once you've then got them, you can then do something with them. So he was an absolute master at getting small groups of people and working them really hard. And his regime was pretty tough in terms of what it was. When I took over Eric and Hamish from that there, some of that was trying to get a little bit away from the oppressiveness of what he thought you needed, just that absolute discipline to the regularity and how hard training needed to be if you were going to get to the top. So he taught them some wonderful lessons, but they weren't going to probably survive in that regime for the rest of their careers type sort of scenario. So that's one reason why, I was involved with them. Others there you mentioned, Alan Cotter, who's a great mate. Alan and I coxed against one another. He coxed New Zealand and I coxed Australia. So he was my boss. He was a coach, a good coach in his own right. But he was a good leader, but he was tough. He had a nickname of Mr. No-No, so you went to him and asked a question and you knew the answer would probably be no. So you did a lot of homework before you went there if you wanted to progress something. And I saw that, because we were contemporaries, as great leadership from my point of view, because it was really clear, there's no yes, maybes, buts or anything like that there too. So, we work really well together and we're great mates today. He's coming over to watch the All Blacks in a couple of months' time and we'll catch up and that sort of thing. Brian Richardson, Richo and I, we were in the same boat together. I was coxswain, he was the stroke of the boat. So we sat face to face in state and international campaigns. So, you have a respect about the human being right from the very beginning. And he had an uncanny knack and sense of feel with crews as well, and was very much sort of his way. And he was fairly quiet from what he actually did, but he was hugely respected because he was like a 15-year international type athlete, so he'd done all the hard yards and he was a solid sort of citizen, and so therefore he commanded great respect from his athletes, and he was a very artful type coach in terms of the boat and in terms of what he did. So some real differences in people there. I worked with Tim McLaren. We started our campaigns together, and he's ended up in the States, and he sort of had his sort of own unique way and great teacher of young athletes. He was a phys ed teacher, as I was there too, and he would teach them manners, behaviours, and those sort of things there. If you want to get into this game, you've got to act and behave a certain way. So he was a master at that, let alone his coaching skills. Reinhold Barchi was one of my early mentors. Reinhold showed people how tough you could actually be. And he was quite old school by today's standards, but it certainly worked for him, and it worked for me as well too when I was actually coming through, because he bollocks me a few times about what I was or wasn't actually doing, and that was good at the time. It's harder to do that sort of stuff in today's time, but he was really influential sort of for me from that beginning, and it was also showing you the way through. And you use an example through the mire of administration and the like. He just took no prisoners. He just barreled through and said, "This is what we need, and this is what we're going to get." So I was a little mini me in that regard there too, trying to get your way in the early, and today it's a lot more professional and those sort of things, but it was a good start sort of for me to be around people like that and great mentors. And out of the sport, David Parkin, I did my internship for sports science with him. Then we worked a bit together. He asked me to run a course within his sports coaching and administration course. So, master AFL coach as well too. So I've been lucky, I've sort of rubbed shoulders with all those sort of guys there, and they've taught me, huge things. And I'm hoping there's a few that I might have helped along the way, which is a really important thing there too, where they might look back and say, well, I helped them, for some of the same reasons.
Talk a little bit about looking backwards, but we're going to hold it for a bit later in the interview if we can, Noel. But you were talking about the differences in those great coaches that you've experienced, and I want to pick up this theme of differences because you've taken crews to 7 Olympics, and I'm just wondering how you've seen the focus on winning change over that time.
Yeah, it is. It's, what's the Sports Commission's new win well, so it was a bit more win at all costs in the early days. And now, where people are talking about mental health and the damage caused by the win at all costs type attitude. And I think that's reasonably contemporary. I think there's a purpose for it. I suppose if you put a bit of a joke towards it, it's win well. We probably prefer to win well by 2 lengths rather than 1 length. That's what you could redefine winning well, by winning by more. And we do have to watch those casualties, but there's a lot of happy athletes, when you do quite well. And of course, some of them there, it's a real struggle and a relief when they finish. So the spectrum of that in terms of putting the big W sort of in front of everything there is very hard to define in any short period of time. And it's very circumstantial to any person, crew, and the like. If you've got someone who in the reality doesn't have the ability, you wouldn't think when they start their campaign to win, not that you're not going out there after it, but you have to lead them in a realistic way forward. Otherwise, there can be a lot of collateral damage to trying to aim too high and the like. But if you've got people who are multiple world champions, well, they don't want to lose. And there's one quote, and you've been very good at picking up my old quotes. I said it after 96. I said, what's better than this, winning twice or something? I said, winning 3 times, so that was like a throwaway comment, but you never get shy of it. And then, coaching Eric and Hamish in New Zealand there, we were on a journey together, ended up being 69 in that boat class and a couple of others in a Cox pair, so they didn't go out to come second in any race they competed in too. So it's how you define that and who you're defining it with, which is a pretty important thing.
I was listening to you speak recently and you were talking about storytelling and how you use it to get your message across, but that these days the story needs to be a little bit more abstract. And I was just wondering if you could tell us what you've learned about messaging when it comes to the generation you're coaching now.
Well, I think, Joe, again, your probing questions get me on my verbose line of thinking. But I had some really good learnings towards the end of being in New Zealand and before I came back to Australia. And that was based a lot on perhaps mistakes in terms of athlete management. By not being contemporary enough and moving and reading the play, utilising sort of your old skills, and this is how they behave, I behave, and we just career on, and then you realise, that that's not necessarily how to go. So then you think, well, if you're going to survive in the industry, then you need to bring yourself up to speed in terms of the athletes. It's all about them. That's the important thing. So if athletes are different, for want of a better word, today than what they were 20 or 30 years ago, then what is the difference? You can easily say they're different. Well, by what? You can blame social media. You can put a spin on it how you like, but they're learning skills. And if we study back when I went to uni, you front up every day and you went to lectures, and now it's all online. There's significant changes in people's learning methodologies, and therefore we need to understand that and move with it. So I've tried to sort of listen, read, learn, from other people about how to do it. And certainly that concept of abstract is really important. They're very visual learners, so you don't tell so much. You give them something to actually see and understand it, and then they go on their learning journey and try and make sure there's some understanding. And you think they're going a little bit the wrong way, you try and tap them and bring them back to where it needs to be, or give them some references to go and research. So there's a lot of differences from just telling them what they need to do to now being part of their learning journey. So the abstract aspect of it, I think, is really, really important. And sometimes you will even not joke, but you say, see that picture on the wall there, it might be some buildings, whatever. It's not really about buildings, is it? What is it? And let their mind run, into, well, it's actually horses in a field, and you're going, oh, is it? Or just try to take them into their own space, about that sort of side of things. And so telling stories, you've probably got to be careful the story's not about you, but it's about activities that have happened before that they can feel that they can relate to, people they know, or an event that they're going to that someone else has been to previously, or some sort of scenario where the story is really strong. And I'm working with Sports Commission University of Queensland in a mental performance coaching program at the moment, and that's a big part about us being mentors to younger coaches coming through. It's the ability to tell the story and to have it relatable so that people can understand, well, what's the messaging that you're trying to give within the story. So you've probably got to be careful you don't story tell all day, but I find myself doing it far more now, and because I'm being a bit more schooled into that line of learning, that I think it's a really powerful tool. And fun. It's fun to get some sort of enjoyable experiences across, and what the purpose and meaning of it all was.
Well, from storytelling to data, because rowing is awash with data. But I was intrigued to read how you use data more as an instructional tool than a policing tool. And I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an oxymoron in one sense, because there's probably a lie involved in that. In one sense, it certainly is a policing tool. I think that's not the reason you do it. But ultimately, if there's a set of information there that you're looking at, but you're never going to relate that to the athletes in terms of, I looked at your data, you're not training hard enough, therefore, so they don't want the data to be collected if you go down that path. But you're certainly looking at it from that sort of point of view, but you're not wanting them to think about it from that point of view. Otherwise, you lose the messaging that you're trying to actually get there as the instructional piece, which is where I come from in it all. So it's a bit like if an athlete is injured, and we work really well with soft tissue people and the doctors and that sort of stuff there too. You feel far more comfortable when there's an image of something, and the doctors are very capable people, when they get to a point of time, I think it's this, I think it's that, and you're saying, let's scan it. Let's get the hard data, so let's put the wires on the boat. Let's get the GPS out. Let's not muck around here so we can actually have some real data. But it can't be lost then too in terms of the artful use of that there too, that yes, it might say this, I've seen that before, we've done this to try and rectify it before, is that relevant in this day and age, or this particular crew or person as well too? And that's where you're bouncing between the really important need for data and the ability for you to say, well, that person rows too short, or they don't row hard enough, whatever it is, but then your mind has got to go to, well, how do I fix that? And so when you say it's not a policing tool, it's not for them, but it is in my mind in terms of saying, well, that's not good enough, but I'm not going to go and tell them it's not good enough. I'm going to try and work ways to make them improve upon that. So, yeah, sometimes when we get interviewed or whatever, we don't get the right depth and necessarily the explanation about how we might use data and for what particular purpose.
No, I think it's a great answer, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people listening. That the numbers are one thing, but the interpretation and communication of them is another thing. So I think it's a very applicable answer to all of us. Yeah. But I wanted to talk about flexibility. You're an advocate of building flexibility into training so that it doesn't become too singular and focused and monotonous and so forth. But could you tell us why variety is such an important part of your philosophy?
Well, I come from a physical education background. So The very first unit I studied in phys ed was sociology, the sociology of sport. And I can still remember my lecturer, Rob Sands. He wore sandals, he was a cool dude. And there was just a couple of things like day one, in terms of why are we doing this, and then therefore then the theory of play comes into process about it, And if you have that sort of understanding as a sports coach, well, what does a little kid want to actually do and get out of sport? And then as they grow, what do they want to get out of sport? So because that was sort of strong in my own learnings early on, then sport's just a journey. It's just an activity that they're doing in life, and there'll be a point in time, as James Tompkins said, I'm going to keep doing this as long as I can because I'm going to be longer retired than I'm going to be in it. And so if you realise that you're part of a journey, which might only be, if you're lucky, a fifth of their life or something like that then too, then it's got to be part of their life at the same time. If you make it just all about that and nothing else, then there's a potential for missing the point, and missing, is there something else that's going to stimulate them for why they actually want to actually do it? And so as I've sort of gone on, that gets more into mindset management and, teaching skills in that area there too, and their own ability to understand mindfulness about, why are they doing it, and, are they enjoying what they're actually doing? Can they live the real experience about it? And so as a coach, you're trying to make sure you impart that. So if I don't go down that journey there and create flexibility in it there, it's all work and no play, no fun, no enjoyment to it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm just this laissez-faire, easy go. I'm completely and utterly the opposite. But I certainly try and make sure that my eye still tells me when this is getting a bit too serious and when it needs to lighten up, because you can't succeed at the top without the hard work. That's just, in our sport, it's a very physical sport. You get a bit too laissez-faire and just have a good time all the time there too, unless you've got absolute brilliant parents who gave you the greatest talent the world's ever seen, then you can't succeed. You can't succeed without the hard work in it. But what defines the other side of it, that they've got the desire to want to do all the hard work as well. So so holistic, what other sort of words you might want to use, plus being institutionalized now for 30 odd years within a multidisciplinary approach too, and having interviewed so many people for roles within sport as well. And the question, what's your thoughts about multidisciplinary? So you're involving all the practitioners and others there too. So if you don't have an understanding of all of that, then I'm not certain that you're ready to be an absolutely elite coach.
Noel, when you're starting to coach a new crew, whether it's Eric and Hamish or whether it's a schools team, what are the things that you do first?
It's like the old, what do you do in your first 100 days, of a job? So if you want to impress someone, you tell them you're going to do this and do that and whatever, and you don't even know what the job is. So that's, you're sort of like, you're winging it a bit too much. So I remember Hamish Bond. It was a great introduction to coaching those guys. They Row New Zealand and Alan, because he was the performance director, thought that I would be a good fit for where they were. And Alan and I talked about me going there a bit, and then the job was formal and then I had to apply and those sort of things there. And then there was a set date. So I arrived and that was the first day of trials of 2013. And then the plan was after trials there, I would meet with Eric and Hamish. At that stage there, Eric had young Zach would have been not even 2. He would have been 18 months probably old. And so he had other things to do. He wasn't going to wait for this new coach, He's just going to get on with what he needed to get on to. And Hamish is a completely different person. So he dutifully waited and sat there. So he and I, we sat down and we had a great sort of chat. And, I knew who he was, or he knew who I was, but it's all been from afar, So you think, well, let's just start our relationship. And he said to me, what you'll see is my oar goes really deep. He said, every coach I've had's trying to fix that. You can try and fix that as well too. And I remember saying, Hamish, you haven't lost a race for 4 years. I think we'll just leave that how it is for the time being. And we'll just have a little bit of think about that a bit later on, So in other words, my brain could have gone, right, he's thrown me a challenge, I'm an expert coach, he sees that as a problem. I'll go on a journey to fix that, rather than go, why don't I just sit back for a little while, have a look at what's going on before I jump into something. And when I do coach education, certainly for our level 2 rowing coaching there, we review video of mistakes that the crews have made. And so if you ask any young up-and-coming rowing coach, what is wrong with this crew there, they take the question so literally, it's not funny. So they're looking to try and impress you. Oh, the blade sky's in the air, or it's messy, or they're not in time. They're giving you some sort of clinical mistake associated with it. But what we try and teach is to say, find out the context that sits behind it. Who's this crew? What level of competition are they going into? How often do they train? How fit are they? So without context, you can't necessarily sort of sit and go in and go, bing, this is what we're actually going to do. So, and I'm a very forthright sort of type person. So if anyone's just going to just charge in relentlessly, it's me. But, I probably made a couple of mistakes from that point of view. So my first method is to sit back for a moment. Find out everything you need to actually know before, and then you start to get an idea, well, maybe I shouldn't just go down that path. Maybe there's a better way of looking at this and the like. So I think, for want of a better word, context is really important before you then start to make a decision. And then you've got to be strong. Once you are, then you commit. I think, A, B, C, these are the things we really need to get hold of straight off the bat, not X, Y, down to X, Y, Z, but no one can sort of handle all of that. So that's probably sort of, the simple way of saying is, just don't go in thinking you're an expert straight away. Find out a little bit more about it. There's a funny story with Dick, and Dick and I had known one another for a long period of time, and he's still like a pen and paper man in terms of programming, and he's not big on computers and that sort of stuff. And I think that's still great. Wonderful trait in one sense, that people can survive in today's day and age with just the art and the feel of what they're actually trying to do. So I went to him and said, mate, you've been coaching the pair for, have you got any data for me? Have you got any files or any programs or anything that might help me, with these guys? And he said, no, you're an experienced coach, you'll work it out. And I've gone, okay. And so therefore he threw me the chalice to be able to say, well, yeah, go and find out, So if he couldn't provide that information, I respected that there too. That's the nature of the sort of person a little bit. And so I couldn't rush into it because there was a whole missing piece, in there that I had to. Unfortunately, there was a sports scientist who had a lot of the science data, and he and I worked really well together. So eventually you pick up the pieces and you go, right, I think I know what I'm doing here now. I feel confident I can run with all of this. So so you got to think on your feet. You got to make good decisions, and you got to seek information from whatever source it comes from.
Well, here in Australia, I know that's Hamish and Erica from New Zealand, but here in Australia, you're most well known for coaching the Oarsome Foursome. I mean, it's been well over 30 years now, but they won back-to-back Olympic golds, and they were really beloved by so many people. And I didn't want to ask you about the gold medals and the races. What I wanted to ask you about was how that team would debrief after a race in order to identify areas that they wanted to improve on. And I asked that because they were well known as being very good mates. They had a laugh before the race. They didn't seem to take life too seriously. And yet they achieved such wonderful things.
Yeah, I think they have the same trait as most really elite athletes do in terms of being very good and honest in the debriefing phase. So the laconicness and all of that was a little bit of a game as well. It's part of their general nature. But to think that you'd be throwing a frisbee or kicking an Australian rules football around in the middle of a rowing boat park, that set them aside in one sense. And they're winning races. So all of a sudden it's all the eyes are on them, and there's those cool dudes, and some of them are blonde haired, and they knew they liked surfing and those sort of things. So that was a bit of play off on all of that. But it was also to keep them leveled and relaxing and enjoying the sport and everything as well. But certainly after performances, particularly if it hadn't gone quite as well as what you wanted to, their honesty and going straight to the point in the debriefing was really, really important from that perspective. So if there was a subpar performance, it was let's attack not attack the performance, but let's just go straight to the root of what the problem actually is. We didn't do this, so therefore, what do we need to do to make sure we don't do that? And things often are habit forming as well too, and so you had to learn levels of tolerance and how you could rectify things. They were a really important part for many years of the Victorian King's Cup crew. And the state crew would train generally once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week there. And it was a Thursday night. And every Thursday night, it was the first half of the session was terrible. And then the second half would pick up sticks. So you debrief that and go, well, come on, let's get on next time. But it did repeat, and you try to not repeat. The last thing you want to do is not have a productive session. So there's a level of tolerance. You go, well, what do we expect here? It's a boat class. We're not in that often. And so therefore, what do we expect as being good, or do we reflect on the positives as well too? Well, you finish really well, so not all's bad. And once we come to race, we'll row the boat a bit more often, and then that early lack of form will probably start to disappear a bit, and we'll be okay. And a bit the same with them pre-racing. They generally would do a 1,000-metre piece a couple of days before racing, and it was always slow because we were always trying to row a rhythm, and we were trying to work on our strengths, and our strengths were just this wonderful rhythm through the middle of a race, and that's where we could sort of do the really, really good work. They rode really well. But if we underpinned the work in that pre-race a couple of days earlier, then generally the boat didn't go, and that would frustrate them. But that was quite regular, So you'd have to say, well, okay, well, let's just we've got that one out of our system. And with the knowledge of that, we're not going to make the same mistake again. So they're really honest in that sort of debriefing sense, and really quite serious in it. Before then, there'd be like a switch, and the switch would be, right, we're now going back to our A personalities, which is cool dudes and having a good time. So that was made the job of a coach quite actually easy, because you weren't trying to rein in a bunch of sort of like happy-go-lucky sort of fellows type thing there too, that you couldn't get them serious about their performance. They just had this wonderful ability to switch on, switch off. That I think a lot of young athletes today still struggle a little bit with too. And so, and again, that was part of their nature, and they were super talented, but they worked hard enough, and therefore being honest about what you needed to do. And there were stories in the book and those sort of things, as it would be with Hamish and Eric there too, where every now and again you really had to address something. So therefore, it got very serious on a few occasions, which was just like readdressing what you're there for, what you're doing, what you're not doing, how we're going to move forward from here there too. And so they become sort of folklore type situations that resurrect for one of someone who might be going off the rail, but I still regard that as pretty normal. It's pretty. I don't think you can survive year in, year out, and everything is roses all the time. You've got to expect to fall over every now and again, and then it's how strongly you get yourself up and get yourself going again.
Did they have any words or phrases that they would use when they wanted to really highlight something and make it serious?
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time ago, and I suffer from Alzheimer's disease, you see, so trying to remember all of those sort of things there. I mean, depending on who sat in what seat within the boat, the people, when the actual rowing was taking place itself, the guys were really, really good at calling, particularly Mike Mackay when he sat in the two seat. He was more able to read the play even better than he could even deliver himself. He was actually an absolute master at it from that sort of point of view. James Tompkins had those keys at a different stage, and he had a different way of going about doing it, but he had huge respect within the crew, so he would be less verbose. He wouldn't be reading the play quite so much, just a little bit of difference in their personality, but you needed to let them be themselves, but know who had what responsibility at what stage in certainly things that they would call in training and within races that they knew were sort of buttons. If you push that button, things go well. So I can't remember exactly every word and phrase, but I can remember the process, quite well.
So Noel, when you finished in Australia and you were appointed to your new role with Rowing New Zealand, your new boss, Alan Cotter, who you spoke about earlier, he said, "We were looking for someone who had achieved results as a head coach in sweep or boats, had worked successfully in a high-performance program, had the ability to develop, lead, maintain a strong team culture." And Noel has all these attributes. It's a great summary, I think, of your career and what you've been able to achieve. But it was the last bit I wanted to dig in a little bit with. And I wanted to ask you, could you tell us what a strong team culture in rowing looks like?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, referring to that was about managing the size and depth of groups of people as well. New Zealand at that stage had done extremely well in small boats. So the team was small and very talented. And what they wanted to do was to build it. And so the men's and women's eights particularly, and quads, and so to get more of their athletes into teams and performing as well as the small boat. So sort of referring a little bit, well, who's got some experience in dealing with bigger numbers, and therefore along with bigger numbers comes the need to have a good culture. You know, the more people involved in something, the more important it is for your culture to be strong so that everyone's on the same page together. So Australia being a bigger country, and particularly when we had crews based within, say, the AIS framework, which now in rowing in Australia that's the men's national training centre. We have a women's national training centre in New South Wales in Penrith. And it's a matter of putting the best people together and getting them to work for the common good. And so having been a leader within that environment there, you know, you probably I had some experience as well. How do you make this work? Because they're actually teammates on one sense, but they're enemies on the other, because they race against one another all the time. And there's only so many seats in this boat or that boat or the other boat. And so getting some clear messaging across about where priorities lie, and that, you know, we're here every day for the common good of what we're trying to do, and all of you are important, but at the end of the day, we can only put 2 in the pair, we can only put 4 in the 4, you know, and we're going to have to understand and respect one another to do it. To be honest, I don't know that I did a really, really good job at that. I don't think I did a really bad job at it, but I was always one step ahead of myself about what I thought it needed to look like and be like. And I got frustrated in one sense because I couldn't quite get on the athlete wavelength and understand necessarily where they were coming from, you know, and sometimes I'm almost too simple in how I think, you know. And you've got athlete number 10, realistically, you know, you ask a whole heap of people and that athlete's in the middle of the pack, but they actually want to be in the top couple, you know, and my mind is taking me to, what bit don't you get? You know, you're number 10, you're not going to be number 1 or 2, you know, but I knew I couldn't go down that path and explain that or say that to them. I'm then trying to work out, how do I let this athlete know that they're not at the top of the tree, but there's other opportunities for them, you know? So I found that quite a struggle to be able to be as an effective leader as, if I look back, as I would have liked to have actually been. So if other people looking at it might say, oh, he did a reasonably good job, and therefore I was more experienced than anyone was in New Zealand at doing it. But I still found that quite a challenge. And the current head coach of the men's training centre, he was my senior coach, and I was a mentor for him when I was there, sort of through the 2009 to 12, that sort of period there too. And he's really good at it, you know. He's some coaches as leaders have that little bit of different personality where he's strong in what he says, but he's really meaningful in terms of being able to let them have an understanding. And we all learn. We learn from one another as well too. So he produces good data sets to say, well, here's the ranking, fellas. You know, let's not get too upset about it a little well too. So I think if I actually went back into that environment or New Zealand again, I'd be far better at doing it a second time round by what I wasn't good at, apart from what I was probably more experienced at and maybe better at than anyone in New Zealand was at that particular stage. But to say that I actually thrived in that environment doing all the right things, I did find that a challenge, you know. And we had a couple of good years with the men's 8, and then we had a few years struggling, and then of course best thing they did was get rid of me, and then I left and then have enough time to rebuild, and some wonderful stories have come out of that. To be part of the journey with those guys that I started with, but to see what they did in 2021 in Tokyo, winning the men's gold and the women's silver, and having the women win a gold medal before that as well too, to think I played a small role in that, I'm really, really proud of. But to think that I had anything really to do with the end success, that'd be telling you quite a porky pie from that sort of point of view. So, yeah, I was the right person probably by way of, world experiences in one sense, but even I wasn't brilliant at doing all of that. So when you tell that to a journalist, of course, that's a bit of a good story, to tell them that that's what this guy's there for. But at least I'd been in the environment, at least I'd been in big centres, had a far better understanding about all of that at the time. So I was probably the right person, but it wasn't necessarily that I was a guru at it by any imagination.
Well, maybe not a guru, but as you did allude to there, you were good at getting people to work for the common good. And I'd like to pick up on this theme because what's really unique about your story is that twice in your career, you've coached teams to back-to-back Olympic goals, which is very, very rare. But what has this taught you, Noel, when you reflect on it? What has this taught you about getting teams in sync with each other?
Yeah, I think I don't know necessarily whether winning them, whether it be back to back or even if you won 3 times in a row, for example. If you think of something like Drew Ginn, James Tompkins, or Drew, he went back to back to back, as an athlete. But each of them are a separate challenge in their own right. And I'm an avid Geelong Football Club supporter at the moment. They're the premiers, and Chris Scott, has obviously done a sensational job there too, and he'll wax that lyrical and probably tell people what he wants to believe. But he probably, I'd say, at a guess, he's quite heartfelt of it. Well, forget about last year. That's gone. This is a new campaign. We've got different personnel in there as well too. So I think all the way through that, I've always taken that attitude, and it's quite tough for people who have actually won because then it's the old slippery slope, if you don't win, you've lost principle, and that puts a different level of pressure on and expectation and those sort of things. The first time round, it's okay. You might have been favourites or second favourite, and you go in. There's an expectation you're going to do okay, but within the second time round, you're defending your title, so it brings a different level of pressure, both externally and internally, in terms of what you're trying to do. But you've got to try and not get too caught up in all of that sort of stuff. And each campaign has its own goals, and you're trying to achieve those goals that will give you the result in those particular performances. But you do know that it's sitting, it's just sitting on the shoulder all the time, the pressure. And as a coach, it had never worried or feared me, because it was a very easy cliche for people to say. Of course, if they win again, it's because they're good, and if they lose, it'll be your fault. So, so you go, yeah, but I never get up in the morning, looking at it in that sort of fashion. As a coach, you never saw that sort of pressure, But the athletes, I'm sure, they would have lived that a lot. And as you hear, often they will say, after certainly the second time round, is what a relief that actually was to get it out of the way. So it's probably easier to win 3 times because you've already won twice, But I think you just got to take each campaign as a separate campaign and look at where you're at in those journeys. And certainly with the 4, change your personnel, change the seating. That in itself is enough stimulus to sort of come at things a little bit different way, and different personalities. So if you thought you were just going to try and rub a stamp, no, I don't think that's unlikely. It might be if you're an individual sport, and if you can run 10 seconds, that'll get you to win, and you do it again. Well, that might be a little bit different. Not in our sport, where there's so many moving parts.
One final question, if I could, Noel, because I can see it's the sun's coming up, and your rowers are going to be coming in soon for their daily workout. But I'd like to preface this final question with a quote, and it's actually from you, and you say, "That's my motivation. It isn't about me. I have this inherent desire to want to make younger people better at what they're actually doing and provide an opportunity for them." And I know you've alluded to this kind of philosophy through this interview, but many of these younger people you coached are now adults, and they're coaching themselves. And I'm wondering, how do you hope they describe the influence you've had on their lives?
Yeah, it's interesting because you sent me that question beforehand. It's probably the one I reflect on, maybe because it's last. That might show you some sort of my concentration span or something. but it was the one I did reflect on a little bit. I think when you've been through a journey with athletes like that and you've shared so many experiences, then they're trying to get on a similar sort of journey and replicate, in their way, sort of what coaching practice is. I'm not certain necessarily you would expect them to come to you and say, you've taught me so many lessons, I will now be able to impart, the knowledge of those lessons on other people. I would see them as being more seamless. If I've done a good job, it's seamless, that they wouldn't have reflected on. They'll just be doing little bits and pieces of what you might have had along their journey. But the importance is that they're creating their own journey. And if you were to be involved in any sort of mentorship or whatever, you would be really trying to go down that path, not this is how I did it. If you do what I did, you'll have a good career as well there too, because that's complete rubbish, So I would certainly be thinking about it there too. And if you've taught them enough, I don't think you need to reflect on it. The more important one are the other people who rowing was just a thing that they did as part of their life, and you taught them lessons for life in that journey. So I get excited still by kids I taught at school or coached at school who still drop you lines or still are swimming marathons and dropping a line. What would Dono have done? How would he have managed this? I've still got his words ringing in my ear when it got tough in the last kilometre, and you go, wow, like that's, I take more heart out of that than the people who you had longer journeys with, because you've done everything, it wasn't just this short part of the life where they got something they can really reflect on. The long coaching journey was a lot of reflection, and as I said, should be seamless, but it's the kids who it's more impactful. When you have impactful impact on people that, you like to think that later on in life they can say, that was really important. I learnt some lessons from that, and I'm still doing those things today as a result of what you taught me. I'm going, gee, that's good. That ego, not ego, but that stimulates you to say, well, I'd like to keep doing that and keep giving other young people an opportunity to learn, if I've got something to give, and can I make them better for it there too? Because some people externally would probably say my ego's off the charts, but I don't think that's any motivation for why I get up, or any honour or glory or anything in the whole thing. If I can't make them better today than they were yesterday, then I'm in the wrong caper. That's the big sign to retire and give it away. And so I'm quite heartfelt from that sort of point of view. If I don't sleep at night, because some of the things we referenced earlier about data or improving or how can I fix something, whatever, it'll be because I'm scratching my head trying to work out, how can I make this better? This guy does this and does that, or school this, she needs to do this. How can I get part of that journey to be able to make that person better? So when that fire goes out, well, that's game over. Give it away, read the paper, go fishing.
I don't think that fire ever goes out with great coaches, Noel. But let's see. It's been fantastic to spend an hour with you this morning. It's been a great time to recollect for me from all those great moments that the Awesome Foursome gave us. So thanks very much for your time, and I wish you all the best for the season ahead.
Thank you, Paul, and keep up your good work telling these stories. You might expect a call at some stage from Bill Davern, who heads up the coaching unit at the AIS. He knows of you and of your podcast. And I ran into him just out of chance actually last night, and we've been sort of colleagues and mates for 30 odd years too. And I referenced I was doing this morning there too. So there's people out there that would maybe like to get on that bandwagon of yours at the same time there too, and get some good stories told.
There's plenty of room on the bandwagon. I'll follow up with you on him later on.
Yeah,
Thanks, Noel.
Righto, Paul. See you, mate.
Hi everyone, you have been listening to the great coach, Noel Donaldson. I hope you got a lot out of Noel's self-reflective and insightful style, and found a few ideas that you can bring back to your own dinner table, locker room, or work table for discussion. When I listened back, some of the other key highlights for me were Noel's view on the importance of taking time to understand the context when you take over new teams and not rushing in with all the answers. the way he uses storytelling in his communication style these days, as it gives the athlete room to interpret the message in a way that is most effective for them. And the role that being mindful plays in his coaching, from the perspective of, can people identify why they are doing it, and are they actually enjoying the activity itself? I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. Just like McAdam, who kept it short and sweet when he said, "Love it, great insights, good podcast, keep it going." Thanks, McAdam. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen, and so if you have any feedback or comments, please let us know. And if they're positive ones, then please let your friends and family know too. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.